Welcome to The Happy Writer, a show about creating and sustaining a long-term author career. My name is Patty Jansen, writer of science fiction and fantasy. I've published independently since 2011. This show covers motivation, diversification, learning new skills, and your place in your career. Come on in and be happy. In episode 61 of The Happy Writer, I want to talk about something that's fairly personal to me. I want to talk about something that I have avoided talking about for much of the past 10 years, because it is now more than 10 years ago that I won the Writers of the Future contest, and I took part in the workshop in Los Angeles. I've had a number of private feelings about it, but through all the mixed publicity and controversy that the workshop events have been getting, I realized that in the first place, over the more than 30 years of the workshops, it has never been any different, and that plenty of other events also create a lot of controversy year after year. Did anyone say Hugo Awards? Naturally, when there is something worthwhile to be gained, people in any community are going to have opinions about it. So why do I want to talk about it now? Well, recently David Farland died. He was, of course, the main judge of the contest, and he would look through the submissions they get for every quarter and decide which ones to shortlist for the other judges. For those of you who don't know, the Writers of the Future contest is a quarterly competition held for short stories and short novellas. I think the cutoff is 15,000 words. The stories are generally on the longer side. They have to be science fiction or fantasy. My story was 10,000 words. Every quarter, 3 winners are announced, and those 12 people then are accepted into an all-expenses-paid workshop for 5 or 6 days in Los Angeles. If you're like me and you're Australian, they pay for your flight. They pay for most other things, including your accommodation and all your tutors. The workshop itself is an event of a couple of days that involves the greatest of the science fiction and fantasy writers. I often refer to some of those writers I've met at that workshop. They really are the huge names in the industry. The flip side, of course, is the origin of the organization that runs the workshops. Yes, it is run in a roundabout way by the Church of Scientology. Maybe it's a thing that they do to help their other lousy PR. Maybe it's because the founder happened to be a successful and well-off science fiction writer and had written in his legacy that he wanted to pay it forward to other writers. Whichever version of this you accept, and to be honest, they're probably both true, it is something that you have to keep in the back of your mind. I will say a little bit more about this later. As I said, I have avoided talking about the workshop for over 10 years, and it's not just about the supposed controversy. There are many things that are controversial in life, and sometimes you just have to roll with the punches. It is also because it seems to be fairly strongly wedded to traditional publishing. Most of the writers who were there were big traditional publishing writers. There were agents invited and publishing representatives. So when I decided to self-publish, also about 10 years ago, I figured that the experience was not all that relevant to my chosen career path. No need to talk about it a lot. But just recently, when David Farland died, I had to rethink this, because basically the workshop had everything to do with my chosen career path. Of course, when I went to the workshop, self-publishing was in its infancy. It was early 2011 that I attended, and Amazon KDP had just become available to many countries worldwide. But self-publishing wasn't quite as accepted as it is today. So, of course, since the workshop invited tutors, who are all big names in the publishing sphere, they were all traditionally published, because self-publishing just didn't have that kind of history. But at this stage in my career where I was going, I had written the first book of the Icefire trilogy. I had sent it to 5 agents, and 3 of them had asked for the full manuscript. At that point, the dragged-out effects of the global financial crisis hit publishing hard, and no one signed any new writers for almost a year. There is one agent who had shown definitive interest in my work before, and she had the manuscript, and I don't think she signed any new writers for that year. So this was the stage in which I went to the workshop. My manuscript, that had received a lot of interest, was out on submission, but noises were starting to come out from traditional publishing that the industry was on hiatus. When I then attended the workshop, I expected to hear about how I shouldn't self-publish because it would ruin your chances and all that kind of stuff. What I got was the opposite. Even though a lot of those tutor writers have long-standing careers in publishing, most of them were also self-publishing some niche projects or had ventured into more serious self-publishing. David Farland was one of those. They were also writers who had such long careers. They told me that if they had been younger, they would definitely have loved to try self-publishing to retain a better control over their work. Many also recognized that having built the audience and the recognition with the traditional industry, there were aspects of self-publishing they could use to extract more money out of existing works. These are the likes of Brandon Sanderson, also an ex-attendee, who went through the contract of his first book, figured out that he had sold most rights, except the right to special editions, then made a beautiful special edition and put it up on Kickstarter, and made more than $1 million with his first project. Of course, a few months ago he did another one, which netted him more than $40 million. There were people like Kevin Anderson, who teaches classes at the workshop, who self-publishes quite a lot of his stuff, and has also started to run a self-publishing service for older writers republishing their backlist. Christine Catherine Rush was also there, and she told us about all the bad things publishers do to screw you over. These days, she doesn't publish traditionally much anymore. Basically, the people at the workshop, and they were all old hands who had been in the industry for a long time, showed us all the different ways in which you can leverage your intellectual property and sell off different parts of it either to different publishers or do it yourself. So this was one of the things I found very encouraging. I had my mind blown with all the different kinds of things that I could do with my work that I hadn't signed a contract for. It was also a matter of mindset. I said in a previous episode to quit being precious about your words. Similarly, you've got to quit being precious about your manuscripts. Your books are not your babies, but your books are your workers that go out for you every day to make you money. The best way of increasing your income is to write another book. Each book is full of chances and new opportunities. If I can write a book in 3 months, and by that stage I had learned to do that, I could write another book to send out to publishers once the publishing industry recovered. But I decided to take that series that I'd had so much interest in and self-publish it, because no one was going to do anything with it in the current economic climate. And if and when publishing pulled itself out of its funk, I could have written another book. That was an extremely important decision in my life. I asked all these well-known and influential writers about it, and they all said go for it. They all recognized that sometimes the time is not right for a certain project, or for any project for that matter. Then you have to create your own opportunities. In effect, these people weren't telling me what to do to be like them. They were telling me to look at them and cherry-pick the bits I liked and then forge my own career. This was so very different from anything else I had experienced up to that point. You tend to get caught in echo chambers where everyone is doing the same thing, just because someone has had success in it, and before you know it, everyone in the community will recommend that particular thing as the one true path to success. It is very hard to extricate yourself from that sort of mindset. If you think that sort of mindset only rules in traditional publishing, I would strongly encourage you to think again. You see the same thing happening in the self-publishing community. Enter any Facebook writing group, and you will very quickly see that the community has a kind of flavor where everyone just reinforces each other. But there is a whole world of different kinds of opportunities out there, and unless you hear from someone who has success in them, and you are forced to sit there and listen to hear them talk about it for 3/4 of an hour, you would never even consider this option. If it was an article, you'd bail in the first paragraph. So even though this workshop was more than 10 years ago, it was still hugely successful for me. It was not so much about people telling me what to do, but people showing me what is possible. Yes, a lot of traditional people were there. Yes, we had to write a short story at the workshop, and I later sold that short story, and another that I wrote later, to Analog. Did being at the workshop help with this? Unquestionably. The main editor wasn't there, but people who had his ear definitely were. There were also some people from other parts of traditional publishing who were prepared to look at people's manuscripts by the reason of having been a winner. If you get thousands of short stories and you select 12, somebody else has already done the cherry picking for you, and all you need to do is sit in the back of the room and see if there is anything you can use. Of course, this sort of thing helps launch careers. But now, what about all the bad publicity? Well, I've had 10 years to think about it, and when someone asked me about it the other day when I spoke about the experience in a Facebook group, my response is basically still the same as it was when I went to the workshop. I recognize that there is controversy. Tread with diligence and care. This next section is going to be very personal. I realize that there are people with different viewpoints than mine. Years ago, when I first entered, I read about the controversy. I read about what happens at the workshop and talked to people I trusted who had attended. You can easily find reports online written by reputable, well-selling authors who attended and have no vested interest in wallpapering over difficult aspects. These things are true about the workshop. The total list of attendees is nothing short of a who is who of genre writing. I name some names. Brandon Sanderson, Christine Catherine Rush and Dean Wesley Smith. They actually met at the workshop. Kevin Anderson. Attendees included Larry Niven, Greg Benford, Tim Powers, and yes, David Farland. Many others, far too many to mention. On the first day of the workshop, you will go to a library displaying all books written by attendees ever. It's nothing short of astounding. The attendance skews male and conservative, although I suspect this is partially a function of the long-established genre grades being of that persuasion. It's changing somewhat, but they're still quite conservative. More about this later. It's run by an entity that is separate but still somewhat part of the Scientology movement, as decreed in the will of the founder. Were you to attend, you will not hear anything about the religion or its reasons for being involved. Questions about it are not appreciated or answered. The workshop's organizers do not run any of the content, just the logistics. They move in the background like grey ghosts, getting writers from A to B. They are courteous people, and many of them, like the face of the competition, Joni Labaqui, have been running the competition for a long time. I don't know what her affiliations are, and I didn't ask. She is helpful, pleasant to deal with, and professional. Should I have asked more pertinent questions? Am I loose with my principles to have attended? I acknowledge issues with the church, and don't avoid reading about those issues, just the same as I know that there are serious issues with abusing priests in the Catholic Church. I know there are issues in Amazon's warehouses and issues with Brazilian coffee growers. But whataboutisms can be dangerous, but you need to find for yourself where you're willing to interact. I have no bone in this game. I'm a fifth-generation atheist, and to be honest, part of me thinks all religion is weird at the very least. One thing I do find important. As a writer, I'm intensely interested in getting a peek into how the other half lives. I find it really strange when writers express a desire to shield themselves off from people who have different lifestyles and different opinions. Everyone has a different tolerance for this sort of stuff. You will have to decide where your line lies. There are plenty of accounts from people who have attended the workshop, so you can read up on what to expect. I hope to go there and learn at least a little bit about this mysterious and much maligned religion. In this, I was thoroughly disappointed. In fact, they make so much of an effort to never ever mention it. It's a weird thing in itself. There is one morning where you start off with some set course material by the founder. I only realized later on that this was part of the teachings, but it's all really common sense stuff. A bit like how I felt when I went to a Catholic high school, because it was literally in the next block, and we had our first religion lesson. The teacher talked about the 10 Commandments. I was kind of disappointed because they're just common things, you know, don't steal, don't kill, and all that kind of stuff is just common sense. If you kill someone, you're going to get into trouble. In what society in the world, regardless of their religion, is that not going to be a thing? Anyway, there was literally no mention of the church. You can also find lots of people who have attended the workshop saying the same thing over the many years that the workshop has run. Then, most of the other reported drama associated with the workshop has to do with the awards ceremony, and that has to do with the conservative bent I mentioned earlier. Yes, if you're a woman, you have to wear a dress. If you don't have any suitable dresses, they will provide one for you. You will probably hate it. Yes, you will also have to have your hair done and wear makeup. I hate makeup, but if you have ever been on national television, you will know that the moment you enter the studio building, your life is no longer yours for as long as you remain inside that building. Every second of your visit is stage managed, and you just have to go along with it. If you're a man, you have to wear a suit. It has to be what they decree is a respectable color. It is a highly stage-managed show, and they call the shots. They have an audience, and they cater to that audience. You're not there to create a drama about wanting to wear a suit while you're a woman or wanting to wear something revealing, looking like a goth or anything like that. If that's going to create a problem for you and you don't like having to conform just once to a conservative image, then it's probably not such a good place for you to be. Literally all the accounts I have read about people encountering terrible experience are to do with this. But it would be the same if you were to appear on national television. The makers of some programs may find it acceptable if you're wearing something outrageous, because that's part of the show, but for many programs that's not acceptable, and therefore you have to conform to what they want for their audience. If you consider yourself gender neutral or transgender, that's really where I saw some issues. People of color or people from outside the US, no issues at all. But gender non-conforming peeps, But I highly suspect that in the 10 years since I attended, this is likely to have changed at least somewhat, although if you're worried, you might want to check some recent attendees. To sum up, mingling with big-name authors ended up being highly beneficial to me because they showed me what was possible. If you feel at all intimidated by the requirement to attend the ceremony, or you wonder whether it will be a safe place for you, I would advise you to check with some recent attendees. Their names are all published, and it shouldn't be too hard to track these people down. No secrets there. Ask them before you enter. In the next episode, I'm going back to craft. A few episodes ago, I discussed some beginner marketing and portfolio mistakes. Now I will discuss some of the ways editors can pick out beginning writers. Thank you for listening to the Happy Writer Show. Check out links and information about other episodes on my website at pattyjansen.com, where you can also find out about my books. You can support me by subscribing to the show or on Patreon at patreon.com/pattyjansen.